Yeah, cool. That's not enough garlic. All right. Alright, yeah, hello everyone. My name is Wesley, this is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing one of my favorite classics, which is a Japanese white miso curry. Is one that I've been cooking for a long time. Even one of the very earliest recipes that we did on the YouTube channel. So I think I've been making this curry probably for like 10 years at least. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I don't say this about many things that I cook, but this might be one of the few things that I have come close to perfecting because I cooked it so many times. I've made it more times than I can count now. So we're gonna take a shot at doing it on live stream. We used to cook it all the time when I used to stream multiple days a week, but lately we've only been streaming every time that there's a new release, which is usually on Fridays. So usually we have new stuff coming out on the YouTube channel every Friday, and on Tuesday we go through the stuff that we have our new recipes for. Today, the most recent YouTube recipe was for a dojang youtiao, which is a Chinese savory donut, which requires a full 48-hour proof. So I can't actually make that on live stream unless you want to sit around for 48 hours. So today we're cooking a classic, which is a Japanese white miso curry, which I think is going to be really good. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I'll do my best to answer everybody. I don't know everything about curry, but I actually know a lot of stuff about this one. So, and as always, if you're looking for the recipe for this white miso curry, I think it came out on the channel a couple of months ago. At least the second iteration came out a couple of months ago. The second iteration was the long form version. So if you're looking for that, definitely head over to the YouTube channel, check out what's going on over there, because we've got new stuff coming out every Friday. Cool. Oh, do I prefer white curry or red curry? Ooh, that's a good toss-up. I don't know if I could decide. I like both. I think I like green curry most, but I like all curries. I don't think I could decide. That's too much pressure. I can't choose. Japanese curry is definitely my favorite though. Although I will say is the more that I have researched Japanese curry, the more that I have discovered that the lines between what is a Japanese curry and what is a Chinese curry is pretty blurry. It's pretty unclear as to like exactly what makes it a Japanese curry, what defines it as Japanese, as opposed to just like basically a Chinese curry. In Chinese we would call this a Gah-li, which is a, is that right? Gah-li, I think? No, Gah-li, forget. But in Japanese it looks very similar, with the exception of a couple of things that we're going to include today. Mainly those being the white miso that we're going to integrate, as well as a little bit of sake. Actually, I think I'm going to be substituting that with, I think that's soju back there because I ran out of sake, but the original recipe video we used dry sake. Whereas in a Chinese curry, you would probably do that with shaoxing wine, and instead of that white miso, you would probably use doubanjiang, which is more of a hot, like a chili paste, both of which probably fall under the same category of like quality of sauce. So they're all very similar, and essentially more or less the one that I'm reproducing every time that I cook this recipe is neither Japanese nor Chinese. It's really just attempting to create the curry that my parents used to make for me all the time when I was a kid. Which I think falls somewhere in between what is a Japanese curry and what is a Chinese curry. And I would guess, I don't know this for sure, but I have a suspicion that the curry that my parents were making was just boxed curry. It was just came out of the box because they were making it on like a Tuesday night and stuff. So, usually when I'm attempting to recreate things that my parents made, they're usually things that were very, very simple, and I'm overthinking it. So, yeah. And do I work in the food industry? Yeah, I guess I do now. I operate a pop-up. We do a couple of locations a week now. We're at the Good Hop every Friday in Oakland, and then we're doing a number of other larger events too. So we're at every first Friday in Oakland, at the First Friday Parade. We just did 3 events last weekend. We were at the Alameda Antiques Fair, and a bunch of other stuff. So we're essentially like kitchen takeovers. We do a lot of kitchen takeovers in spaces, and then when the kitchens aren't available, we usually just operate using wok burners. And oh shit, I just realized that the face camera is not working on Reddit. That kind of sucks. Let's see if I can fix that. But yeah, it's we have a couple of locations every week. So if you're here in the Bay Area, come find us. It's called everything is called Woo Can Cook, and we got lots of cool stuff going. I don't know that I'm going to be able to fix this face camera without breaking everything else. May just be that you don't get to see my face on Reddit today. that might be what it is. But okay, anyway. Oh, there it is. Yeah, just unplug it and restart it. You've been binging all the videos. Yes, awesome. There are a lot of videos, so you can absolutely binge watch all of them. I think we're coming close. I have to actually count, but I think we're coming close on the 100th recipe, which is really exciting. So there's so many videos now, so if you want, you could probably binge watch recipes for a couple of hours, I think. So that's really cool. Thank you for watching. Yeah. Cool. So kicking things off first, this is our aromatic veggies that we're going to start off with. You'll probably recognize these as the 2 elements that you'll see in almost every savory Chinese recipe. At least every savory Chinese and like Chinese inspired recipe that we do. You're probably going to have a little bit of garlic and a little bit of ginger. And that's not because everything has to taste like garlic and ginger, although that is often the case in Chinese food. Really what we're doing is establishing like groundwork for what we're going to start building. So in this case, we're working on building layers of umami, and as we start doing that, the first thing that we're going to use are these aromatics. So this is going to be the very, very first thing that goes into our wok fry, and then we're going to bloom out their aromatic qualities and then add other stuff on top of it. So very, very often you'll see a couple of fundamental things that will come up in a lot of our recipes. The number one thing probably being garlic and ginger, but you'll probably also see things like soy sauce come up a lot. Green onions, those are also really, really common. Stuff like that. So it's too much. Not too much. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Antiques Fair, yeah, the Antiques Fair is really, really fun. We have a really big following. So I think we sold out like midday. I think we sold out before lunch last weekend. So that was crazy. People eat a lot of fried rice there. So yeah, so if you're here in the Bay Area, definitely come find us. Every Friday at the Good Hop in the Oakland Kono district. We're kicking that residency off this Friday. And then we just wrapped up another residency at Federation Brewing in Jack London Square. And we're all over, so if you have the time and you are local, definitely come find us. We're doing a lot of like wok fried stuff, so mostly fried rices, but also a couple other things that you can do in a wok on propane. Yeah. All right. So next up, this is going to be what we were looking for is about 2 tablespoons of finely minced ginger. Today, by the way, I'm doubling our curry recipe again because I've been cooking for my neighbors lately, so that also happens with ginger a lot. So if you're not doubling the recipe, though, this should be 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of finely minced ginger. Ginger, of course, because it's a root veggie, grows in really weird shapes. It grows in the shape of root, obviously, which means that it's really hard to measure. So when you see it in a recipe, and you'll usually see it measured out. Sometimes I usually will call for best measurements in tablespoons, but of course measuring something in tablespoons, measuring ginger in tablespoons is not super useful because you need to know how much ginger to chop before you know if you've got the right quantity. So what I usually say is about an inch of ginger, which of course is an approximation given that ginger is weirdly shaped. So use your best judgment. Lots of times, very, very often, I'll end up chopping too much ginger. And you'll usually see me setting aside some amount of ginger, which is not the end of the world, and I also end up throwing away ginger a lot. It's for that purpose, yeah. Is there a ginger substitute? Honestly, if you're allergic to ginger or if you just don't like ginger, I would just leave it out and use more garlic instead. But to that end though, when you're like cooking in other cuisines, so I would say the combination of ginger and garlic is really only like a traditional thing to see in Asian recipes when it's a Chinese recipe. That's really it. It's just Chinese, and probably more specifically like Cantonese Chinese. I have a habit of using it in a lot of other cuisines, so I'll bring it up in most Thai, Korean, and Japanese cuisines because I think it tastes really good, but it's definitely not a thing that is super, super common. Especially in Thai cuisine, I barely see like traditional recipes using ginger. In Thai food specifically, you'll probably see the use of galangal root, which is probably like closer, but very, very different. It looks similar, but it tastes very, very different. Not super commonly found in most like traditional Korean stuff. Also not super commonly found in like most Southeast Asian. So if you're particularly averse to ginger, or if you're like allergic or whatever, I would just leave it out and just double the garlic. All right, so that's our ginger. This looks like relatively the right amount of ginger. Also, by the way, if you're lazy, you can also throw this in a food processor. That's what we do when we do the food pop-ups, and we're like chopping like 7 or 8 pounds of ginger, which I don't feel like doing the knife work for. We'll throw it in a food processor, and you could get probably a better mince. The downside being that you now have to clean the food processor, which is terrible. Anybody who's ever cleaned a food processor knows that cleaning a food processor is the absolutely worst thing because they've got like weird nooks and crannies. There's parts of it that are electric that you can't run under the sink. It has a lot of sharp edges that you will probably cut your finger on. It's just the worst. If I can avoid using my food processor, I probably avoid it. Granddad, yeah, today, hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley, this is Woo Can Cook. Today we're cooking a Japanese style curry that I'm going to do with a little bit of white miso. It also happens to be one of the recipes that I've been cooking for, one of the longest recipes that I've been cooking. And if you've been watching these streams before, you probably have seen me cook it many times. I used to live stream it probably like once a month or so because it's one of my favorite things to cook. More lately I haven't been cooking it because we've mostly been live streaming new recipes, so basically just the things that are coming out on Fridays. Every Friday we've got a new recipe, and every Tuesday we're usually cooking through that recipe. Today, as it happens, the new recipe that came out on the channel is not something that I can cook on live stream because we did a Chinese donut, which is a youtiao, and it requires a pretty long proof time. So instead, we're doing a classic, which is this Japanese curry. It also happens to be a curry that I've been eating probably since I was a baby, I would guess, and I've been trying to reproduce that curry for probably most of my life. And I have a suspicion that the curry that my parents were making, I'm pretty sure it was my mom's curry, is a boxed curry. She gave me the recipe once, and it was not what she was cooking. I like had the recipe, and I had modeled my own version off of it at one point, and it was way wrong. Like it had all kinds of things that don't belong in a curry, and it just didn't taste right. It had like white wine in it. It didn't work. So I may never know what that original curry was. Yeah. Cool. So next up, that was, by the way, an entire sweet white onion. because we're doubling. If you're not doubling, that should be half of a white onion. And next what we're doing, this is going to be some russet potatoes. I like using russets. You can also use, I've also done this with Yukons and they taste really good. Any kind of starchy potato will work really well. Any kind of potato, I should say, that works well in a stew, which is to say to avoid things like, actually I'm not really sure what to avoid. But I definitely, my go-to has always been russets, because it's the potato that I always have on hand, because I eat a lot of potatoes. So. This also, by the way, as far as I'm concerned, is the one ingredient that I think makes a Japanese curry a Japanese curry. I actually don't think it's things like miso paste or sake or stuff that specifically comes from Japanese cuisine. As far as I'm concerned, what sets it apart is the presence of like super starchy elements like potatoes. We're going to use potatoes and carrots today. Those are things that you don't normally see in other curries. So like an Indian curry or a Thai curry, you wouldn't really see the presence of potatoes and carrots in something like that. So what I always have felt is that this is what makes it a Japanese curry, is that it has a whole bunch of starchy potatoes and carrots and veggies in it. Whether or not that's actually true, I'm not actually sure, but that's how my mind has always seen it. So today we're doubling, so I think this is going to be something like 5 or 6 potatoes. If you're doing your own version, I would use 3 potatoes, probably 3 if they're really small potatoes, 2 if they're really large potatoes. We have really small potatoes today, so I'm using 6. And I want to say that there's not really a specific secret to how to peel a potato other than don't lose hope and just peel it really fast. I guess peeling really fast has been a trick that I picked up recently. Actually, not recently. But yeah, I guess we could talk about that. So what I like to do when I peel potatoes, lots of people ask me how I peel potatoes so fast. So usually there will be a flat edge right around here, and I plant that into the cutting board, and then we just rotate them. If you're not trying to film yourself, which is what I'm doing right now, I like to do this under running water in the sink. Because it catches a lot more of these peelings that are kind of flying around, which makes it a little bit more tricky. You have to go and like pick up these peelings later. But if you're doing it in the sink under running water, the water will just sort of catch everything, and then it just sort of catches all in the sink. And all you have to do is empty the sink out later. If you're doing it on camera, though, you have to do it over the cutting board, and that's a little bit more challenging. All right, and that should do it. So here's our potatoes. Well, one other thing that I should also mention, as I was peeling these were in a bowl of water. So we want to store these in water. So you want to be careful, especially with russets, but any kind of starchy potato, this is going to be true. As you peel them, you want to hold them in water, because if they're holding outside of water, if they're kind of exposed to air like this, once the skin is off, you're going to start running into oxidation issues, and that's when your potatoes start turning pink. That's never a good sign. It's not a terrible issue. If you don't mind the fact that your potatoes are pink, which probably is not that big of a deal if you're throwing it into a long braise like our curry today. But especially if you're doing things like hash browns or things where the potatoes are going to be particularly exposed, you want to try and hold that in water, otherwise they're going to turn pink. It will mess up your presentation real bad. Oh man, I do not understand a lick of German. Sorry. All right, so for our potatoes, we're going for a large dice. Potatoes are conical, by the way, so what we want to do as we chop them, I'm holding my knife. I'm not cutting it exactly parallel because this is going to give us a slightly uneven cut. So I'm cutting at a slight angle here, and then we're going down for our chop. like so. If you're super committed, what you can also do, this is actually this is pretty relevant. As we chop, if you chop and just chop straight down, this is especially true with anything with like a really wet surface, like a potato, for example. If you don't want stuff to stick to your knife, it's not sticking today. There you go. When you don't want this stuff to sort of happen, that gets really annoying if you're trying to chop really fast, because it's safe for like trying to chop this whole potato and stuff starts sticking to your knife. That's because of the surface area of the potato. So my best solution, and I think this is a pretty common solution, is to chop with you want to be chopping with the tip of the knife. So don't chop down like this, or it's going to stick to the potato like that. We want to we want to pull the knife back, and that's just with the tip of the knife, and that's going to let you chop a little bit faster, so that you don't have to deal with the potatoes sticking to your knife all the time. So, like so. I was just yeah. Yeah, cool. So that's a little bit of knife technique stuff. I don't know a lot about knife techniques, but that's a really useful one if you cut a lot of potatoes like I do. I'm also, by the way, chopping my potatoes fairly large today. You normally won't see me chopping potatoes that large, but the reason that I'm doing that is because we're going for a long braise in our curry today, which is going to help break down the really rigid qualities of our potatoes nicely. So if we weren't planning on braising it super long, I would probably chop them a little bit smaller, and that's just going to sort of help them cook all the way through a little bit better. So like when we did our the ganjatorim recipe, which is like a Korean like a wok fried potato, something like that, I guess. When we did that recipe, I chopped them pretty small, and the reason for that is because if you don't chop them small enough, they won't cook all the way through. With a curry like this, though, we can absolutely long braise it, and it should cook thoroughly. So, as I was chopping, again, just like we were doing before, I was holding this in a pot of water. So, we want this again as we sort of like move forward onto the next thing that we're about to chop. Make sure as you're holding these, hold them in water. If you don't hold them in water, they're going to start oxidizing. And by the time that you get to your curry, you're going to have pink potatoes, which is not attractive, not good potato plating. Potato tips, yeah, cool. Glad to be helpful. All right. So next up, this is our carrots. What I like to do, I don't know that this is necessarily essential, but I have found that this smaller tapered end of the carrot, it can get kind of bitter. So I like to remove that, as well as obviously you want to remove this root end too, because that's not edible. But especially with smaller carrots like this, where it's tapered really aggressively like this, I like to remove that whole tip, because I find that it's a little bit more bitter than the rest of the carrot. That may or may not be true. But that's my personal taste. And then again, just like we were doing with the potatoes, we have this flat edge now too, now that we chopped it off. So we're planing the carrot down into the cutting board and rotating. And again, if you're not trying to film yourself, this is really useful to do in the sink over running water, because you won't get peelings flying everywhere, like that's happening right now. All right, so thankfully I should say, we're not doing any julienne cuts, so this carrot should go relatively quickly. Anybody who has watched these streams know that I fucking hate doing julienne cuts, because they're really annoying and difficult and time consuming, and I hate them. That's me though. So as I often do, what I like to do with carrots is I like to sort them by size. and that's just going to help us sort of like pay a little bit more attention to how we're chopping the carrot. So with this really small tapered end of our carrot, for example, we want to be specifically careful because we're probably not going to get small chops like this on our larger carrot ends like this up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chop it on a wide bias like so. Probably need a strainer. And that's just going to help us get as even as possible. This is always a little bit of a guessing game, but we're trying. Our goal here is to get relatively even-sized pieces of carrot. We want them again also to be even to the size of our potatoes, the way that we chop those potatoes too, with the intention that as we cook in our long braise, we want those things to all be of a similar size, because if they're not a similar size, then they're also going to cook unevenly. So you'll end up with things like either your potatoes overcooking or your carrots undercooking, or both. So here's our largest piece. I'm chopping that in half, and then there's the potatoes, relatively close, or carrots that are relatively close to all the same size. I don't think I need a strainer. All right. Cool. So last up, we're going to move on to our sauce element. I think we're done with chopping. At least, yeah, I'm pretty sure we're done chopping stuff. So what I like to do, you can also do this on heat too. But what I like to do is assemble this sauce element off heat, because it just kind of eliminates them as much as possible, eliminates variables that we're trying to do as things are on a timer. So once something is on heat, you're kind of working under the clock. So what I like to do is do as much of this work before you get on heat. Now, if you get really familiar with a recipe, sometimes, especially if I'm not live streaming it when I cook this dish, I'll do it on heat, because I've made this recipe literally so many times that I could just throw it into the wok. And I've gotten super familiar with it. But if you're not really familiar with the recipe, like for example now, because I'm doubling it, if you're not super familiar with the recipe, I would probably try and assemble this stuff off heat. And that just kind of inserts as much time as possible for you to like stop and pay attention to the things that you're doing, and will help you avoid mistakes, which only happens, or mostly happens, when you're rushing, I think. So I'm doubling again, so that was I should say 8 tablespoons, or half a cup. 4 to 8 tablespoons, or a half a cup of soy sauce, followed by that was 4 tablespoons, or a quarter cup of Japanese mirin, which is a rice wine. I have enough oyster sauce. Yeah. Next up, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of oyster sauce, which again, by the way, oyster sauce does not come from Japanese cuisine. This is definitely a Chinese element, and I actually picked it up from the original version that my mom was making, or at least the recipe that she sent me. So, Gah-li Gai, is that one the Chinese term? I think it's Gah-li Gai. Anyway, oyster sauce, that definitely falls more in the realm of what you would do in a Chinese curry. But again, we're kind of all over the map here. And then last up, what this should be is quarter cup, is that right? Yeah, it's quarter cup. This is going to be a quarter cup, or half a cup, I should say. Or, yeah, let's just do all of it. That should be dry sake. I believe what I'm using today is actually soju, which is not the same thing, but relatively in the same vein. And mostly what we're trying to look for is just a little bit of like alcoholic brightness, and that's just kind of open the curry up a little bit. If you've got it, definitely use dry sake, because it tastes really good. If you don't have it though, any kind of alcohol works. So you could also use white wine. If you're in Chinese cooking, you could also use Shaoxing wine. Anything that whatever it is that you've got, probably don't use red wine. That will probably give you weird coloring. But anything that you've got that's alcoholic and bright. You could even use rice vinegar. That would probably work just fine too. Today we're subbing, and I'm just trying to use up this bottle of soju that's been sitting in my refrigerator for a couple of years. I want to say it is actually a couple of years. So. We finally did. I think somebody brought that to a party once, and I ended up with it. It's not very good. Last up, what this should be is 4 tablespoons of what it again should be white miso paste. So, and that is what we also use in the original recipe. As you'll notice, this is not miso paste. This is doenjang, which is a Korean equivalent of miso paste, which I bought a couple of months ago because I was shopping at a Korean mart and couldn't find the miso paste. But it is, again, also very, very similar to miso paste. Essentially what doenjang is unspiced gochujang, which is like a Korean like chili paste. Doenjang is a similar thing, but it's unspiced. So if you don't spice gochujang, that's what you end up with, and it is very, very similar to miso paste. The main difference being that it comes from a different food culture. So in a pinch, you can substitute them out, as I happen to have been when I was at the Korean market looking for Japanese ingredients, which is probably my first problem. Ooh, you're gonna try beef. Yeah, that will probably be really good. Like a flank steak or any kind of like really, really tough, like a stew meat. Any kind of stew meat, that will be really good. I don't think I've ever made this with beef. I've made it with tofu. I've made it with many, many different kinds of protein, but I've definitely made it with chicken a lot. I've made it with pork. Definitely like pork chops will work really well. I made it with firm tofu a lot. I've made it with no proteins at all sometimes. Also, it's worth mentioning that it has a whole shitload of like starchy vegetables. So those potatoes and carrots are absolutely, that's enough to carry the whole dish. You could even like also throw in like an additional starchy potato, like a zucchini or something, and then you could just skip the protein entirely because it's already a very, very like protein heavy curry already. So. What I'm doing right now is I'm just basically just going through and breaking up these as much as I can, these clumps of miso paste. We don't want this stuff floating around in our sauce because if you're not careful when you have like a really clumpy sauce like that, once that gets into the wok, it might not come apart. If you're like really aggressive with how you toss it, will probably eventually come apart. But if you're not tossing correctly, it might actually just get stuck to the bottom of the wok and just sort of like a big clump. And that's going to cause all kinds of problems for you going into the stew. So what I like to do, as much as we can, is just break up those really big clumps of miso paste with a whisk or a fork. Cool. So that's our sauce. All right, so last up, this is going to be some chicken thigh. If you don't have, again, if you don't have chicken thigh, you can use really whatever kind of protein that you've got. You could use chicken breast too, that will work just fine, but it's not going to make a huge difference. Today we're using chicken thigh because it happens to be the thing that's in my refrigerator. But you could use whatever you've got. If you're making a vegetarian version, you could do this with firm tofu too, or again, just omit it entirely. Ooh, the benefits of miso. In lieu of salt. I don't know that I would consider it like, yeah, so like miso is to salt as like, I guess like as soy sauce is to salt. It is like a salty addition, but I wouldn't necessarily say it is like a substitute for salt. Salt is just salt, whereas miso paste, more like how do I best explain this? I would say like the saltiness that you get from miso is more of a byproduct than it is a result. So we're not using miso paste to create salty qualities. It's more of a, this is a side effect of adding miso, is that it adds salt to it. So when we go and add salt, that's really just compensating for the fact that not everything that we add, or the combination of everything that we added, is not creating our final dish as something that is salty enough. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it is like using miso in lieu of salt, but I would say that like when you do use miso, you're going to end up using a lot less salt. So something to that effect. I think that's how I would explain it best. So more accurately, what I think about when at least when I conceived of the idea of adding miso to this curry, is what I was really looking for is like more of an umami bump. So the problem that I had always had with this particular curry when I was originally workshopping it is that it always seems to sort of like fall flat a little bit. And part of that ends up, lots of times, a big part of that is definitely like what kind of curry powder that you're using. Is it like really, really old curry powder? And if so, it will definitely help like cause your curry to fall flat a little bit, and you might end up like dumping a whole shitload of curry powder in. What I had always ended up doing was adding a little bit of red chili flake, which to me is always a little bit of a cop-out because it's like there's nothing complex or interesting about red chili flake. It's just red chili flake. It just makes things a little bit spicier. So when I added miso paste to this curry, what I was really looking for is just something to like kind of bring it to life a little bit. And what I think my original idea was to add doubanjiang, which would have been a Chinese choice. And then what I would say is the addition of miso paste resulted in me using less salt. Not no salt, but definitely a lot less salt, because the miso paste was so salty already. You hear the nose whistling? Yeah. I actually think, I noticed this too, I probably should fix it. It's because the compressor on the Reddit mic is like so aggressive. You can hear everything. And I should probably turn down that compressor. I'm not really sure how it got to be such an aggressive compression. All right, so that's our chicken. Let's clean up this cutting board. I lost my plastic cutting board. Otherwise, I would be cutting meat on the plastic cutting board. But it might be with the pop-up stuff. I think it might be with my pop-up gear. Also, I hate chopping on plastic. It's just a weird feeling. It's a weird pet peeve, but I don't like chopping on plastic. All right, so here's our chicken. We're gonna do a really quick marinade on this. And this might be just sort of like the standby marinade that I use anytime that I don't know what to put in a marinade, but this might be one of the first dishes that I use this marinade for, so. That's, I think that's actually 8 tablespoons, half a cup of soy sauce for what I believe was 8 chicken thighs. I think that was 6 or 8 chicken thighs. And then next, this is a shake of white pepper, probably closer to a teaspoon now. And finally, this is going to be about half a teaspoon of cornstarch. And that's just going to kind of like help slow down the exterior cook of our chicken. The cornstarch doesn't really do much in terms of like flavor. Cornstarch is flavorless, of course, but it just sort of like slows down the cook time of your chicken. So we're gonna saute this a little bit, and that's just gonna sort of help slow down the exterior cook so that the chicken doesn't burn as we sort of wok fry it. Cool, so that's our marinade. If we're paying attention, I probably should have chopped that first, because if you're paying attention, this should be marinating for about 30 minutes, or at least 15 minutes. Is probably not going to marinate for even that long, but here we are. I forgot. Alright, so that's our chicken, and I think we're done. Last thing up that I'm going to set aside here, these are our dry spices. So this is curry powder, and curry powder, by the way, is a spice blend. It contains many things. Usually the primary ingredients in curry powder is going to be cumin, turmeric, and probably chili powder, plus probably a couple other things like fennel and anise and other stuff like that. I forget exactly what's in this curry powder. But what I like to add anytime that I'm using curry powder is a couple of things that I find like kind of give it a little bit of a bump, and that's going to be a little bit of extra turmeric and a little bit of extra ground cumin, both of which I think are just going to help sort of move things along with the curry powder, especially if your curry powder is a little bit dead. This happens to be relatively fresh curry powder, so that might actually not be necessary, but we'll find out. Why are chefs so fast-paced? Yeah, I don't know. That might be a chef thing. But when you're trying to cook 200 servings in under 4 hours, that's definitely a thing. As you just start getting used to moving really, really fast. Otherwise, people get really mad at you. Some of the events that we do, people start getting upset when their food doesn't come out in under 5 minutes, which is like, you can't. A bowl of fried rice cannot be cooked in under 5 minutes. So I don't know what your expectation was, but yeah, as you start cooking for other people more often, you'll find that you start moving a lot faster in the kitchen, because otherwise it takes too long. All right, so over on the stove, I've got my wok. We're gonna get this heated up. I probably should have heated up earlier, but here we are. We're going to get that heated up as hot as a wok will go on a home burner. And then we're going to start off with our wok fry. By the way, one of my favorite parts about this curry is that it all happens in a wok, which we're going to run through in a second, because lots of people think that you can't cook curry in a wok, which is absolutely false. I don't know who got the idea that you can't long braise stuff in a wok, because you 100% can long braise stuff in a wok. Lots of people think that you can only flash cook in a wok, but that is 100% untrue. So we're going to talk about all that. Do I know Uncle Roger's on YouTube? Yeah, that would be cool. If somebody wants to help me collab with Uncle Roger's, I would be super down for that. Yeah, I don't know how to set that up, but please somebody set it up, and I'm hella down. I know a lot about fried rice. I'll say that. Cool. So hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Tuesday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on the YouTube channel every Friday. So most often we have new stuff that come out on the YouTube channel every Friday, and then we cook through that recipe on Tuesdays, which is today. The new recipe that came out last Friday was for a doujiang youtiao, which is a Chinese savory donut. So it's like a kind of like a French cruller with no toppings that you eat with a savory soy milk, which is very interesting and probably a little bit unusual if you're not familiar with Chinese like dim sum cuisine. So that recipe, if you're looking for it, over on the YouTube channel, it's really fun. And we took a lot of like interesting experiments with it. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely head over to the YouTube channel and check it out. That recipe also happens to be something that I can't cook on live stream because it requires a huge 48-hour proof. So we're cooking through a classic, which is a Japanese white miso curry, which is another recipe that came out on the channel a couple of months ago. Close to a year ago now. So if you're looking for that stuff, definitely head over to YouTube and check out what's going on over there. Lots of cool stuff coming up. We're working our way up to 6,500 subs by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. But in the meantime, we're cooking through this really, really classic Japanese curry that I've been cooking for the better part of half my life now. So I've gotten really good at cooking it, and we're going to run through some of my favorite steps. The first of which is anytime that you're wok cooking, you better make sure that this thing is very, very hot. If your wok is not as hot as possible, you're probably not wok cooking correctly. And then going in first, here's our aromatics. Garlic, followed by our ginger, which, by the way, true on both cameras. Yeah, this is true on both cameras. Anytime that I cook garlic and ginger, it always blows out the white balance on the camera. So I'm sorry that you can't see the garlic and ginger. I don't think I have ever filmed garlic and ginger in a wok properly. Because the white balance 100% of the time will always blow out when I add garlic and ginger. Something about white on black just does not let it come out correctly. Man, one of our cameras just crashed. Sorry if you're watching on Reddit. The cameras are taking a shit lately. There it is. So there's our garlic. Really what we're looking for is that to be nice and fragrant. So use your nose. That should, to me, is about 10-15 seconds, but use your nose and cook accordingly. Then next going in, here's our chicken, which again, this should be 30 minutes of marinating time. This is not 30 minutes. I think this has been marinating for maybe 5 minutes. It'll be fine. As best as possible, I'm holding back the liquid of our marinade here. We want to hold back as much of that liquid as possible. That's obviously, unless you're going to use a strainer, it's not going to be perfect. But what we want to do is try and make sure that we hold as much of that liquid back as possible. Otherwise, it's definitely going to burn. And then you burn your hands and arms and shit, which I have done many, many, many times. More times than I care to count. And then next, the first thing that we're going to do, because we're looking to pick up a little bit of color on that chicken, is I'm going to let it sear for about 2 minutes. And that's just going to give us a little bit of texture and a little bit of smokiness to our chicken. The curse of garlic, yeah, of course. Second camera's not working. Yeah, hopefully that's fixed by now. I think I fixed it. Looks like it's working now, but I did see that it crashed a second ago, so let me know if it's not working still. But yeah, that is definitely the curse of garlic. I don't know how to better film it. Maybe position the ring light differently. But anytime that I add garlic and ginger, you notice this is also true in the recipe videos too. Is that every time that the garlic and ginger goes in, the white balance blows out. It can't be fixed in post-production coloring either, so I don't know what to do. I have given up. That's just how it looks. At first I thought it was like because it was a shitty camera, but it's actually not even that. Cool, so if you're paying attention, what you should have done is sear this chicken before adding the garlic and ginger. Right now our garlic is already in the wok. What we want to do is sear the chicken and then add the garlic and ginger. If you add the garlic and ginger and then sear the chicken like we're doing right now, the garlic and ginger is probably going to start burning, which is what's happening over here. That's probably going to be fine. I'm not too worried. But if you're paying attention, try not to let that happen. Am I living in Japan now? Oh no. If I was living in Japan, this kitchen would be much smaller, I think. I guess this kitchen is pretty small. No, I live in Oakland, California. That's also where we operate our pop-up. So if you're here in Oakland, come find us. We're at a bunch of different locations every Friday. Ooh, yeah, seriously, Daphne, we have both. We have both eggplant dishes and spicy fish fillets, both of which have come out fairly recently. I think both of which were also requests that folks asked for too. Most recently, I think we did the eggplant stir fry from P.F. Chang's. I think that was probably the most recent one. I also did another eggplant stir fry. It's a Thai eggplant stir fry using Thai chilies. That's coming out in a couple of weeks. But the P.F. Chang's eggplant stir fry already exists. And something else that I'm not remembering. And then fish fillets, we did salt and pepper fish with fish was really good. And then we also did miso salmon tacos. That was really good. That may partially be because I just love salmon, but yeah. All right, so you will notice our chicken is not cooked all the way through. That is totally intentional. We do not need our chicken to be cooked all the way through. You also want to remember that our chicken is going to go through a full-blown, like, good solid 10-15 minutes of braising here. So it definitely does not need to cook all the way through. Our goal here is not to cook the chicken. Our goal is to actually just let it pick up a little bit of color. and that's really all of it. All that our aiming for today. And then next what I'm doing is I'm clearing some space in the wok so that we may add our dry spices. This is our curry powder first, 4 tablespoons, followed by what next should be 2 teaspoons of turmeric, and finally 2 teaspoons of cumin. If you don't have the turmeric and cumin, you can absolutely skip it because you probably want to remember that curry powder already contains both of those things almost by prerequisite. That's what makes curry powder yellow, is that it contains a lot of turmeric. But I like to add a little bit extra because I find it just sort of helps to open some stuff up. And then again, I like to let that make some good solid contact with the wok surface. That's just to sort of help open up the curry, help open up those dry spices a little bit. That was a little bit of water. This is our potatoes going in, and then I'm gonna add a little bit more water there. I'm not particularly measuring the quantity of water that we're using. And that's because we're just going to be continually adding more water as we go. So it's not actually super important to measure the amount of water that you use because you're just going to continue to add more water as you go. Mainly what we're looking for here is that our ingredients are submerged. So we want to make sure that our potatoes are fully submerged in that water. Do I live in a van? No. I definitely would not have a kitchen if I lived in a van. That would be cool though, if people would see people stream from their van kitchens. I don't know how much you can actually cook in a van kitchen though. I guess you could probably do stuff. Probably not an open flame though. I want to say that most people who do van life stuff, you're probably cooking on a hot plate, which is what I hope is not an open flame. Because if it's an open flame, then you could burn your van down, which is dangerous. Anyway, so I've got my curry in the wok. This is pretty much ready to go. We're just going to let this reduce probably for about, you could let this reduce for as long as you want. That thing could go, if you want, you could let that reduce for full 48 hours or whatever. And it would probably be really, really good. It is obviously not going to go for a full 48 hours. I'm going to let that go for about 10 minutes. Basically what I'm looking for at this point, because I'm not planning on letting that reduce for a full 48 hours, is I'm going to let it braise until our potatoes and carrots are cooked all the way through, which is probably going to be about 10 minutes or so. Yeah. Yeah, so that's probably going to be about 10 minutes or so. So really what we're paying attention to is when our starches are cooked all the way through. The chicken will cook long before the starches cook all the way through, so that's not our big concern. You will also notice that there's 2 things, or well, one thing and one thing that I forgot to prep. But the first thing that I have not added yet, this is our onions, which does not burn or blow out on the camera. I really think it's just the white on black. That's probably why it's blowing out. The last thing, though, that I have not added, those are our onions. We're going to hold those back for quite a while. I like to hold the onions back until like the last 2 or 3 minutes or so, because if you add onions too early in a long braise, especially diced onions, they're just going to start coming apart, and then you won't have anything. They'll literally disappear into your braise because it will just start shedding water until the point where it sheds all of its water. And if you, this is probably something you could test this out on your own too. If you grab a piece of onion and you crush it enough, it will basically disappear eventually because you're basically just crushing out all of the water in the onion. So if you do that in a braise, it will eventually just straight up just disappear, which is cool, but also not our goal. We want there to still be onions in our braise. And then the last thing that I'm doing, here's our wok ring. Lots of people ask about this wok ring. The significance of a wok ring, it doesn't do much, doesn't change the way that you cook. Really what it does is it stabilizes the wok on the range. So you'll notice if you've seen me stir frying, that the wok that I'm using has a rounded bottom, which means that it just sort of like rolls around on the stovetop. That's nice. I actually prefer that because it kind of like helps me maneuver when I'm stir frying, so it like kind of helps me toss a little bit better. If you're not familiar with like rounded bottom woks, it's going to feel a little bit unusual because it's super different from how like a stir fry pan would work. So if you're not familiar with rounded bottom woks, I would probably start out with a flat bottom wok surface because it's going to feel a little bit more similar to like a frying pan. This is not my first wok. This is probably like the 10th or 12th wok I owned. So this is, I picked this up in a restaurant supply store, and I actually found that it's a little bit more maneuverable than those flat bottom woks, as long as that you're like comfortable working in rounded bottom surfaces. The downside of it is that the wok is pretty unstable, especially if you're doing something that you don't want it to be moving around. So if you're not stir frying, if you're braising like we are today, we want to have a wok ring. Otherwise, this thing could roll right off the stovetop, which is not fun. Especially with a curry like this, number one, because you would lose the curry, but number two, because you would have hot curries flying everywhere, which is real unsafe. So the other, probably the number two other thing, probably the number one most important reason, the most important thing that I use that wok ring for is when I'm deep frying, where we really, really don't want stuff to move around, because if your deep fryer starts rolling around, then you could start spraying fryer oil everywhere, which is very, very dangerous. So. Yeah, so the wok ring, it's not really doing much, although I have found the reason that I don't use it when I'm stir frying is because I found that it kind of just like limits our ability to maneuver the wok, and then you're just sort of like limited to the range of the wok ring, which is a little bit annoying. Kind of makes wok tossing a little bit harder, so I've stopped using it. Cool, so the last thing that I'll prep here, because I forgot to do it earlier, which is fine because we got a little bit of time. This is going to be our cornstarch slurry, and it will also be the very, very last thing that we're going to add. You'll also see this come up in a lot of Chinese food, and this is essentially what we're going to do. Is add, this is going to be, I want to say this is going to be 3 tablespoons of cornstarch, and then we're going to mix this with a little bit of water, and that's all that's going to happen. Our goal here being that when we add this cornstarch, we don't want it to be a solid. We want it to be liquidy, because the solids of cornstarch won't come apart. So if you add cornstarch solids to a stir fry, it might work. If you spread it out well enough, it might actually work, but more likely it will just stay clumped up, and then you'll have a clump of cornstarch at the bottom, which we don't want. So we want this to sort of come apart in our braise. So in order to make sure that it's gonna come apart properly, we're gonna mix it with some water. Yeah. Oh yeah, how hot do you get your wok, or is it just on the normal slow burner? Yeah, so that's a good question. So the woks, especially rounded bottom woks, they heat differently depending on a lot of things. So if you're new to wok cooking, I definitely would not recommend starting out on a rounded bottom wok, because it's going to pose all kinds of challenges that are going to be unfamiliar. Number one being that it doesn't have a flat surface, so you have to learn how to maneuver the fact that there's no flat surface. Which means that stuff doesn't stay in one place. It's usually going to slide around a lot, which is why it's so good for stir frying, but not so great for things like hash browns, for example, or like searing stuff. Plenty of things that are not useful in a rounded bottom. But the number two thing is that you get different kinds of heat distribution, especially if you don't have a huge BTU output. So the woks that we use in the pop-up, we operate that on wok burners, which I think kicks out like 250,000 BTUs, something like that. It's 250 or 225. And that gets really, really hot. It gets so hot that you can sometimes set the oil on fire if you're not careful. It gets very, very hot. And that's really useful in a wok, because it means that you can fill the wok all the way up. So you can cook 10 servings of fried rice in a wok, in an 18-inch wok. You could fill 18 inches of a wok all the way up, and it will still stay very, very hot, because you have so many BTUs pumping out into that wok. In your home burner like this, that might not work so well, because what will happen is if you were to fill up a wok all the way, it's not going to be able to hold its heat anymore, because it's got so much work to do. You're pushing the farthest limit of what your home range is capable of doing, which is probably kicking out closer to like 20 to 25,000 BTUs, which is pretty standard for like a gas range. I think this is a 25,000 gas range. So what we want to do when we're cooking on home ranges is try and batch cook as much as possible. In our case today, I end up doing very much batch cooking because I actually don't think that you need to with a braise like this, because there's not very many things to batch cook. It's pretty much just the garlic, ginger, and the chicken, and that's basically it. That was the only parts that we were stir frying. The rest of it is just having it in a braise. So in our case, while we're braising, it really doesn't matter how hot the range is. I have it pumped all the way up, but that's mostly just to get it to a boiling point, and that's just so that we can start reducing the curry a little bit. So that unlike if we were like stir frying, if we were stir frying, that would be we definitely want to make sure that our wok is nice and hot. Otherwise, we're going to start undercooking stuff. In a braise, though, really what we're just looking for is to make sure that things start boiling. So, good question. Sorry, the chat is cutting stuff off again. Oh, 5 burner, yeah. Yeah, those are really useful. You definitely don't want to operate those inside because you could start an oil fire for sure. But yeah, if you've got a wok burner, they're really, really useful because it means that you can cook really, really large quantities. And it also means that you can flash cook really, really quickly. So, for example, like when we cook the fried rices at the pop-up, the eggs cook pretty much instantly. You could cook a fried egg in under 2 seconds, I think. Basically, as soon as the egg gets in the wok, it's probably already cooked. And that is because the wok is literally so hot that it's cooking as soon as it's making contact with the surface, the egg is already cooked. So that's probably not something that you will ever be able to achieve on a home range because the wok will never be able to get that hot. So in that same vein, really what the purpose of that is, the reason that we want our woks to be able to get that hot is that you can do that with other things that you want to cook very, very quickly for a very, very short amount of time. So usually that ends up being things like vegetables. So like, for example, you could do a kung pao chicken where it has a whole bunch of vegetables. So like you have your like celery, maybe bell peppers, some onions, carrots, something like that. And you can cook those really, really aggressively. So it's going to cook for no more than like a minute, maybe less than that, depending on how delicate the veggies are. And then you can immediately move on and finish cooking from there. And the idea being is like that's the quality that you'll know from most Chinese like food, most Chinese takeout and like Chinese stir fries and stuff, where the vegetables, they're not technically raw, but they're also not cooked very thoroughly either. And that's really just like has a little bit of a smoky quality and it's maybe like just past its raw stage. That's how they do that. It's cooked really hot for a really, really short amount of time. And then you get a wok fried veggie like that. It's terrifying, yeah. It is definitely, it's not for the faint of heart. You want to get used to playing with fire before you encounter or start moving around with a wok burner. They're pretty scary. They go really hot. The first time that I tested out our wok burner, I did it in my backyard and I set the oil on fire, and it was scary. I didn't know what to do. But in that moment, I didn't know what to do, and I had to like stop and think because there's mostly I remembered a whole bunch of things that I'm not supposed to do, but I couldn't remember what I was supposed to do. I was like, okay, I know not to throw water on it. I know probably don't smother an oil fire. I know not to just leave it. I couldn't think what to do, so I just sort of watched it for like 30 seconds before I figured out what to do. But yeah, definitely read the instruction manuals before you get into wok frying on a burner. But if you've got one though, definitely get yourself, look into the burners that we use in the pop-up. They're made by these guys. They're called Wokman LLC. They make these really, really cool burners, and they sent us a couple for no other reason other than that they're really cool, and they asked us to use them, and they are really dope. So check them out if you're looking for a wok burner. Wokman LLC. They got some cool shit. And give them a shout out. Tell them we sent you. Add water. Oh, not quite. We finally have reached the boiling point, though. So I'm more or less just kind of coming back occasionally and just giving things a stir, and that's basically just making sure that as we're sort of braising, stuff is also sort of, some of it is touching the bottom of the wok, so we want to make sure that nothing is frying. So we don't want anything touching the surface of the wok. We want it just sort of like suspended in the braise. But yeah, I guess from that camera angle, it kind of looks like it's getting low, but it's actually not that low. But again, yeah, also for the same reason, that's why we're adding an indefinite amount of water, because we're basically just going to continue to add water until the potatoes are cooked all the way through. So I think at the start I added, maybe that was close to 2 cups of water, and then we're probably going to add another like 1/4 cup or so. Cool. All right. So this is we're probably about like, might be about halfway through. I'm mostly paying attention to what our potatoes look like. I think the carrots are going to cook through faster than the potatoes. As we're paying attention, we're going to keep our eye on these large diced potatoes. And once they're cooked through, we'll probably be ready to sort of finish up this braise. Yeah. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Tuesday at 6:30 PST with new recipes on my YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday, we came out with a recipe for a Chinese dojiang and youtiao. Dojiang meaning Chinese soy milk, youtiao meaning, I think it literally translates to oil stick, which the most common translation or like English menu description that I have seen of youtiao is Chinese donut or Chinese cruller or Chinese fried dough, all of which are like terrible descriptions of what a youtiao is, mostly because they don't accurately describe what it is that you're eating, because it's technically not a donut. When you call something a donut, what you're imagining is that it's sweet, so it's like glazed with something. But a youtiao is actually not glazed or seasoned with anything. It's just fried stick of dough that contains a little bit of egg, a lot of butter, and I think a little bit of sugar. But for the most part, it is not sweet at all, which is misleading to call it a donut because it tastes nothing like a donut, nor does it even look like a donut. There's nothing about it that makes it a donut other than the fact that it's deep fried and it's dough. And then really the only thing, most common way of eating a youtiao is with a side of soy milk, and you'll probably see like a soup bowl of soy milk, usually hot. You'll eat it with some youtiao, and sometimes you'll even see it chopped up. The version that we did in the recipe last week, actually we did all 3 versions. So we did the sweetened soy milk version, we did another savory soy milk version, which is essentially Chinese soy milk that is seasoned with a couple of savory things. I think I did it with soy sauce, lao gan ma, and then a little bit of black vinegar, I think. But all very, very common preparations of Chinese soy milk. And then I think I did one more version or a couple of versions because we were trying to do like a fusion idea, and I did a couple of basically I just made it a donut. So I like coated it in a couple of things. I think I did like a sugar cinnamon version. I did another like chocolate and white powdered sugar version, stuff like that. So stuff like that. If you're interested, Olive's over on the YouTube channel. Lots of fun stuff coming out over there every Friday. That one is a part of a whole series that we've been doing that's dedicated to Chinese fusion ideas. So things, weird things that you can do in like the sphere of like American influence to things that come from like more traditional Chinese food, which I think is really cool and interesting and fun to do. That's one of my favorite series. So if you're interested, definitely check out that series. Because we got lots of fun, cool content coming up. The very, very first of that series might have been one of my favorites, which was a Chinese like lapchang carbonara, which is essentially a pasta carbonara done with lapchang, which is a Chinese sausage, instead of guanciale or pancetta, however you look at it. And that was really, really tasty, and actually an idea that somebody sent me, and it was really good. So stuff like that all lives over on the YouTube. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely head over. Check out what's going on over there. We've got new stuff that's out every Friday, and we're working our way up to 6,500 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please pop over and subscribe. Lots of cool stuff coming. Cool. Am I making meat bird? I guess chicken is a meat bird. I guess that counts. Today we're doing, by the way, I should finish by saying, today we're doing a Japanese white miso curry. And the reason that we're doing that is because a Chinese youtiao is not something that I can cook on live stream because it requires a pretty long proof. I think it took, was it like 24 hours or 48 hours? I can't remember. It requires a pretty lengthy proof. And it's also just generally not something that I can really eat for dinner, so I don't feel like cooking it on live stream. So there have been a couple of recipes more recently that we skipped on live stream because they're not really things that you can cook in the span of an hour and a half. Definitely many things that I can't eat for dinner. So the dojang and youtiao, I skipped that. More recently, we also skipped we did some tasi baos, which literally took me 3 days to make. And I skipped that live stream because it takes a really long to make those. Although we have recently started serving those up to pop-up, so I figured out how to make them faster. So very often, or on occasion, when we're cooking things, or the recipe is for something that I probably can't cook on live stream, that we'll end up cooking something, we'll go back and recook a classic like this one. So as it happens, this curry is one that I've been cooking since I was a kid. So this is loosely inspired by a curry that my mom used to make, which I have no idea what was in it. I have given up a long time trying to recreate it. My best guess is it probably is made from a box. It's probably just a boxed curry, and I'm remembering it in my head differently. But the inspiration of that miso paste comes from trying to what I remember my mom's curry tasting like. So we're nearly there. I think this will gonna take maybe another like 3-4 minutes, and then we should be ready to go. Cool. Alright, let's taste some potatoes. Oh yeah, that's nice and ready. Our potatoes are nice and tooth tender, or fork tender. It maybe could use another like 2-3 minutes, and then it will be good to go. So in that last 2 or 3 minutes, I'm gonna add our onions here. And the reason that we're holding these onions back for is because if you add onion too early, once an onion gives up its liquid, it essentially just disappears. So if you long braise an onion, literally just vanish and you won't have onions in your stir frying. When we long braise in curries like this, it's always a good idea to hold back those onions for a really, really long time. Otherwise, you're not going to have onions, which is a bummer because they're really tasty. I am finally, by the way, adding that's a little bit of extra water, mostly because the addition of those onions are not submerging anymore. So. Yeah. Cool, so the very, very last thing that we have not yet added is our cornstarch slurry. And the reason that we're holding back our cornstarch slurry is because we want our curry to reach its final reduction before we add. So there's two more things that we haven't added, I should say. The number one thing is our cornstarch slurry. The cornstarch slurry is intended to thicken up our curry. If we add that too early, it might thicken up our curry too early, and then it will end up being too thick. And if you add too much cornstarch slurry, you might have to add more water, and then your curry the ratios are going to be slightly off. So before we add our cornstarch slurry, we want our curry to have reached its final reduction point. Otherwise, you won't know how much slurry to add. And the number two, and also very, very important thing that we have not yet added, you'll notice that I have not added a single grain of salt yet. When we do long braises like curries, but this is also true for things like bologneses, ragouts, anything that's going to long braise for a super long time and is definitely going to reduce. You want to hold back that you want to hold back your salt until the very, very end, until you're ready to start serving it, basically. Because if you season with salt before you finish reducing, then you could season aggressively to accommodate however it is that you're tasting at that moment. And then once it reduces, it's going to become more salty because the salt is going to condense more. And then you could very, very quickly oversalt something, which is the worst thing that you can do. Oversalting is basically the worst thing that you can do because you can't undo oversalting anymore. So once something is oversalting, you can't remove salt anymore. It now has the salt, you can't go back anymore. So what I always say is if you're not sure, undersalt it and then serve the dish with some salt on the table, and then folks add the salt on their own. But oversalting is a mistake that you can't back out of anymore. Once it's oversalted, it's oversalted. Cool. So at this point, I think our potatoes are probably cooked all the way through. So mostly what I'm watching now are onions, and basically waiting for our onions to cook all the way through, and we should be good to go. Which means it might be time to add our cornstarch slurry. I'm going to add this cornstarch slurry a little bit at a time. I like to add about a third in thirds, or maybe the first third. Give it a turn. Add a little bit more. You might not actually need the rest of it. This cornstarch, things start thickening up pretty aggressively. So curry has gone from like watery to pretty thick and luxurious. That's what we're looking for here. And that is what our cornstarch slurry does. And then finally, the last thing that we're going to do, and this is, again, very important to do at the very, very end, is we're going to taste and season to salt. And that actually does not need very much salt. Again, somebody mentioned this earlier, but miso paste is very, very salty. So if you add enough miso paste you may not actually end up needing very much salt. Yeah, in this case, we don't need very much salt at all. Usually I would probably, if I wasn't using miso paste, I probably would have added like 2 or 3 times more salt than that, because I probably would have needed it. Yeah, that's good. So again, everything that we added is capable of withstanding long grazes for quite a while. So if you wanted, you could leave this in the wok and just leave it simmering like that for a long time. So if you want, you can make that in the morning and then just let it braise for like literally 12, 14 hours, which is one of the things that I remember why my house always smelled like curry sometimes. It's because my mom would make it in the morning and then it would just braise for literally the entire day. That's a good idea to do. It's good for meal prep, and it's also going to sort of like help the curry develop its flavors a little bit more thoroughly. Today that was literally only braising for like maybe 20 minutes. So that's not going to like develop very significantly, but it's still going to develop nicely. Normally I would remove that to a bowl, but I actually don't know that I have a bowl that large. So. I think I might just end up letting it hang. And then I'll have to look for some very large Tupperware, I think. So if you've got it, this would be a good time to use some leafy garnish veggies. So if you've got some green onion, that would be great. Some cilantro would be a nice addition. I have none of those things, so I'm not going to garnish today. But if you've got some, that's a good addition. We zoomed in too much? This might be zoomed in too much. We overdid it. Let's pull it back. Wrong game. Cool. All right, so that's it, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If you're looking for this recipe, it lives over on my YouTube channel. We published this, I think it was back in like January or so, maybe even earlier than that. It is inspired by a couple of different recipes. Probably the first thing that it's inspired by is by my mom's curry, which was one that I've been eating for my entire life. But it's also significantly inspired by a curry that you can find in San Francisco at a place called Bazaar Cafe, which also makes a really, really good curry too. So if you're looking for stuff like that, definitely head over to the YouTube channel, check out what's going on over there. We have a whole series of things coming out. Those are out every Friday. So this Friday coming up is going to be a recipe for, I forget. I think this Friday's recipe is going to be Chinese dajiaomian, which is like a meat sauce noodle. I think that's what's coming out. I think. Don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure that's what's coming out this Friday, though. So if you're interested, go head over to YouTube, check out what's going on over there. We're working our way up to 6,500 subscribers by the end of the month, so lots of cool stuff coming up, and lots of cool content every Friday. So every Friday we've got those long-form recipes. Every Monday following is going to be the short-form recipes. So if you're following from GIF recipes, that's where those all live over on the YouTube channel. And the shorts, those short little 1 minutes, those are out every Monday, and then every Wednesday are all of the beats that go underneath those videos. So if you're looking for it, head over there, check it out what's going on. All right, thanks everyone. See you soon. Bye.
It's like strawberries on a summer evening, and it sounds just like a song. I want more berries and that summer feeling. on a summer evening. Baby, you're the end of June. I want your belly and that summer feeling, getting washed away in you. Breathe me in, breathe me out. I don't know if I could ever go without watermelon sugar high, 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 watermelon sugar high. I just wanna taste you, I just wanna taste you, watermelon sugar high.
It bothers me and I'm feeling unhappy. I just try and think of nice things when I'm happy. Well, let me see, nice things. Daffodils, green meadows, raindrops on roses, whiskers on kittens, cream-colored ponies and crisp apple strudels, doorbells and sleigh bells and schnitzel with noodles, wild geese that fly with the moon on their wings. These are a few of my favorite things. Girls in white dresses with blue satin sashes, snowflakes that stay on my nose and eyelashes, silver white winters that melt into springs. These are a few of my favorite things. When the dog bites, when the bee stings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so bad.
Well, good for you, I guess you moved on really easily. You found a new girl and it only took a couple weeks. Remember when you said that you wanted to give me the world? And good for you, I guess that you've been working on yourself. I guess the therapist I found for you, she really helped. Now you can be a better man for your brand new girl. Well, good for you, you look happy and healthy. Not me, if you ever cared to ask. Good for you, you're doing great out there without me, baby. Gotta wish that I could do that. I've lost my mind, I've spent the night crying on the floor of my bedroom. But you're so affected, I really don't get it. But I guess good for you.
Smooth like butter, like a criminal undercover. Don't pop like trouble, breaking into your heart like that. Cool shade stunner, yeah, I owe it all to my mother. Hot like summer, yeah, I'm making you sweat like that. Ooh, when I look in the mirror, I'm not sure how to do. I got the superstar glow, so to the boogie line. Side step right left to my beat. I like the moon right with me, baby. Know that I got that heat. Let me shake your stock and shit. Side step right left to my beat. Can't let it flow.
Closed off from love, I didn't need the pain. Once or twice was enough, and it was all in vain. Time starts to pass before you know it, you're frozen. Ooh. But something happened for the very first time with you. My heart melted to the ground, found something true, and everyone's looking round, thinking I'm going crazy. But I don't care what they say. I'm in love with you. They try to pull me away, but they don't know the truth. My heart's crippled by the veins that I keep on closing. You cut me open and I keep bleeding, keep bleeding. Love. I keep bleeding and keep bleeding. Love. Keep bleeding, keep bleeding. Love. You cut me open. keep me from falling. Hey, but nothing's greater than the risk that comes with your embrace. And in this world of loneliness, I see your face. Yet everyone around me thinks that I'm going crazy. Maybe, but I don't care what they say. I'm in love with you. They try to pull me away, but they don't know the truth. My heart's crippled by the veins that I keep on closing. You cut me open and I keep bleeding, keep bleeding, love. I keep bleeding, I keep bleeding, love. Keep bleeding, keep bleeding, love.
Baby hair with a woman's eyes, I can feel you watching in the night. All alone with me, we're waiting for the sunlight. When I feel cold, you warm me. And when I feel I can't go on, you come and hold me. It's you and me forever, Sarah. Oh, won't you smile for me, Sarah? If you feel like leaving, you know you can go. But why don't you